Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Nerd Feed Cast. Thanks for joining us. We'll pretty much cover. There's no news. There are news. We're not covering anything. This whole episode is going to be dedicated to our thoughts on the second season of Loki. It ended yesterday. Yesterday? Well, yeah, technically yesterday. No, it is today.
Today,
UK Friday.
Yeah.
And it's over, we've seen it, but we're essentially going to share our thoughts on the season, like the complete season. So we'll share our mid-season thoughts already.
Yeah.
But I think it would be nice to go back to the subject of Loki and just cover the whole season now that it's finished.
Yeah, so good evening everybody, again, welcome to Nerd Feed Cast. We're here with my lovely friend right here. I know I have to introduce him every single week, but just because I feel as though
I'm very forgettable, so I need to be.
This man right here needs an introduction, okay?
Yeah.
He needs an introduction because he's just that momentous, okay?
Forgettable.
Is that even a word? Momentous?
I think so. It's a word now, if it's not already.
No, but long story short, guys, we're going to be touching on Loki Season 2, what the season means in the grand scheme of the MCU, what we thought of the season, the strong points, some of the things that we felt could have been a little better, and let's just get right into it. So, how did you feel about the season overall?
I thought the season was really good. I mean, in terms of just Marvel stuff, it's peak Marvel. I know, relatively speaking, it doesn't really mean anything given what the output has been recently. But I think the season was really strong. And it ended strong too, but we'll get into that. What are your thoughts on the just the overall season?
I'm very much going to echo your sentiments as well. I thought this season was amazing. Yeah. It was absolutely amazing. A little difficult to understand at certain points, but you're naturally going to fall into those sort of problems when you're dealing with abstract concepts and you're dealing with time travel, alternate realities,
that's a good point.
Space-time continuum, the whole shebang. You're naturally going to have a lot of questions to ask. And look, this season left me with a lot of questions, but that's not a bad thing. What I will say is this show is keeping the MCU, or what remains of the MCU, alive. Just like Kang maintained the sacred timeline, and this show is single-handedly maintaining the MCU. From the acting, from the plots, the writing, the concepts that we're dealing with, the visuals, the way it's being presented on screen, and everything is just there. This has the heart that the MCU is sorely missing. And because of that, we're able to connect with the characters, we're able to connect with their vision, we're able to look forward and say, you know what, we know where they're going. And it's just been such a pleasure to be part of this journey.
It started like really small scale too, which is where we ended compared to where we started is such a major difference.
I mean, look, from the beginning of the very first season, we come across Loki, who in the 2012 timeline, in the Avengers timeline, because of Ant-Man and Iron Man going back in time as part of the Avengers Endgame plot, they went back to try and retrieve the Tesseract and to try and retrieve the Mind Stone. But essentially what happens is, Loki, in that branch, because of the interference of Ant-Man and Iron Man, manages to get hold of that Tesseract, and he transports himself to a completely different time, a place that he shouldn't be. And because of that, we're introduced to the TVA, who look at what Loki did as a crime against time, so to speak. They bring him into the TVA, and then Loki's introduced to this whole new world. And from that point onwards, we knew that this was going to be something special. In
that moment, we're like in the same boat as Loki, because we weren't really aware of the TVA either. And someone who's like a god in that universe, and him not knowing like a bureaucracy that controls time was probably a shock too.
Yeah.
I would imagine. Yeah.
Absolutely. And look, from to get started with season 2, where we start off with season 2 is the death of He Who Remains, the death of Kang. Okay, so essentially what happens is we're dealing with the blowback of that decision, and with Sylvie killing He Who Remains, we're seeing the ripples across various timelines. We're seeing the branching of timelines. We're seeing everything go out of control. And Loki knows he has a mission to try and fix this. So what ends up happening is, one thing that I really sort of resonated with is the connection between Loki and Sylvie. I found their connection to be very, very strong and quite profound, especially in this season.
It's almost like they're the same person.
But, honestly, where we see them at the end of last season and where they end up in this season, it's really cool to see that relationship sort of transition. Now, for me, one of the most significant parts of this show, if we're going by the whole of sort of, season 2, is where, Loki ends up developing some sort of a relationship with Sylvie that goes beyond what we sort of saw in season 1. So, look, at the end of the day, Loki knows that what Sylvie did was wrong. Now, Sylvie has no regrets whatsoever at first. She thinks what she did is justified and she'd be prepared to do it over and over again. And we saw her willing to do it over and over again, despite Loki stepping in, after he goes back in time into that He Who Remains citadel, just before she actually kills him.
But she doesn't really know she's doing it over and over again.
No, absolutely.
It's consistent every time.
Absolutely. But the thing is, Sylvie is absolutely intent on carrying out her will, in putting an end to He Who Remains, because, in her mind, she's doing the right thing.
That was her glorious purpose.
That's it. And it's, sort of poetic that our version of Loki is out to sort of prevent that from happening, despite the connection he has with Sylvie. Now, with Loki stepping in to try and stop that from happening, we ultimately end up seeing that despite what he tries, it's not going to work. It's ultimately not going to work. And, Loki ends up controlling the art of time slipping. Now, guys, for me, time slipping was probably the most fascinating concept we've come across in this whole season. What do you think of the concept of time slipping?
That was one of the main problems. Like I think it was like a convenient writing sort of way where they gave Loki a power to try and explain or just move the story forward. Because time slipping came into play majorly in the last 2 episodes. But correct me if I'm wrong, but they never answered why Loki was time slipping or why he's like the only one who's able to then control like going back and forth in time either. I don't think that was explained.
I think they briefly touched on why he time slips, but you're right, they didn't touch on.
What did they say?
I don't think they touched on why, or how he's able to control, him in time slipping.
Why is he able?
But I think what they sort of addressed, I think Ouroboros mentioned it actually. I don't think they spent too long on it, but I think what they sort of explained was, because it's difficult because, look, everyone in the TVA is essentially some sort of, variant, so to speak.
Yeah.
So, with Loki, I think Ouroboros mentioned that because he technically doesn't belong, in that period. And look, we have to remember that he was also pruned by a version of himself, wasn't he?
Well, that solved the time slipping issue. That we find out in episode 4 or whatever, that he prunes himself. What happened in the first episode, where he needed to prune himself. While I guess Mobius's wire is like attached to the loom or something. Then he got kicked out of the temporal loom. That I guess fixed the time slipping thing, but he started doing that again in episode 4 or something, right? Was it 4? I don't even remember. But yeah, I honestly, my reading, I don't think it was ever explained why he's the one who was time slipping. I thought the concept was fascinating. I was hoping, and I brought that up during the mid-season review as well, that I hope that it's not like a lingering question.
Yeah.
That they do answer that either maybe Kang left in time slip, that maybe while they were at the Citadel, he made Loki into like a temp pad or whatever, right? And that allowed him to like control time, kind of. In the finale, we sort of do see like he can also freeze time just the way He Who Remains Kang as well. But yeah, to me, that was one of the concepts that I thought that they did it to make it convenient for them to tell the story.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't really feel like that was comprehensively answered or like sold to the audience, I don't think. But yeah, sorry, you were saying something about the time slipping thing.
Yeah, no. Honestly, I completely take that on board. See, with the way I sort of read the time slipping phenomenon, and I don't want to spend too long on it because there's so many other really, really interesting things to talk about in this season. But I didn't feel like they needed to spend too long on explaining it. I felt like after we saw it, because look, this show definitely doesn't spoon feed.
Yeah, it doesn't hold your hand.
Exactly. And I'm not expecting any show to try and do that, because ultimately it insults our intelligence as fans and viewers and everything like that. But look, once we saw him time slip, I sort of sat back and I thought, okay, why is he the only one sort of experiencing this? But then I sort of thought, he's leading this pack, he's leading this movement. He's the architect behind this movement that's trying to sort of oppose he's opposing He Who Remains in a very different way to the way Sylvie is. But I thought, look, if we're gonna have Loki as the guy in a driver's seat, he needs to have some sort of power or some sort of mechanism in order to contest and stand against some of these larger powers out there. Because look, when this show started, the TVA seemed like infinity and beyond, and Loki seemed really, really small. And now, after watching the finale of season 2, it's the complete opposite. The TVA seems like a snippet, and then Loki just seems like the architect of everything now. So it's very, very sort of interesting to see where it ended up. But look, I don't want to spend too long on the time slipping point.
Yeah, I just think on that point, it's just that I understand that the writers don't really hold your hand and sort of guide you through the story or something. But when you introduce something as major as that, it's also insulting not to try and explain it.
Yeah, I mean, you've got to give us some sort of an explanation.
Because then it seems like, he just developed this power to move the story forward. It's kind of like the Gaia thing, where Gaia gets all these powers to have this massive fight at the end, but then you just leave it at that. She's arguably the most powerful being in the MCU now, but then you just leave it at that. It's odd.
No, I know what you mean.
I think it's the weird thing is, time slipping can be, it's not like it's a hard thing to explain. You could do the Kang explanation. You could say that when Loki was kicked out of the temporal loom, he basically got attached to the loom in some way or another. That way he can actually control the time. Honestly, they literally could have spent like 30 seconds trying to explain that, and that would have taken the runtime of the finale to 55 minutes to 55 minutes.
Yeah,
it wouldn't have changed anything. And not that that's an issue. Honestly, it's, some of these Marvel shows or movies, you just have to not think too much about it. Endgame, if you think too much about it, it doesn't really make sense.
No, I absolutely agree.
But yeah.
No, I'm totally with you there. Look, another thing that I wanted to sort of touch on was, He Who Remains himself, and some of his variants. So we were sort of exposed to the Victor Timely variant of Kang, and
He's still around.
I thought that was a really cool character, for them to introduce. Where we're sort of made to believe that, okay, after the death of He Who Remains at the end of season 1, there's some sort of inevitable force or will to recreate He Who Remains. And the only way to do that is if we find a younger version of the exact same person. And then we had the scene where Renslayer, chucked the book into that little window, and that book contained everything that the younger version, the kid version of Kang would need to become the genius and the great mind that Kang eventually became. So just to sort of see that, regardless of whatever happened, there are different versions of all the characters we know and love across time, across the multiverse, and they have the potential to be the worst version of themselves or as benevolent as possible, depending on how their lives sort of shape or are shaped. And that one decision that Renslayer made to, put that book into that window created Victor Timely. And then we see Victor Timely accompanying, Loki, Ouroboros, Casey, Sylvie, and just that whole gang, sort of going back, learning about, the temporal aura, the temporal loom, and how to navigate these forces so that they can ultimately try and do what they want to do to save everything. And what I found really interesting in the finale was the way that they kept going back to before the point that the loom just exploded, the Big Bang, so to speak. Yeah. They kept going back. They kept trying. Yeah. So they kept going back. So initially, from the last episode, we were sort of exposed to the idea that, okay, maybe they can't go back because you can't go back to the point where everything was destroyed, because there's nothing there, essentially. But there is something there at the point before it happens, and the only way you can access all of that, again, we're sort of exposed to the idea that if everyone in that surrounding area is in close proximity, you have all of their sort of auras at once, and then that's how they can go back. But ultimately, we didn't sort of go there because the way we got there was through Loki time slipping. So Loki repeatedly time slipped, time and time again, to get back to that point, to try and do things differently, to make sure that the outcome was different. But again, Victor Timely, he kept dying. He goes out onto the bridge, keeps getting spaghettified. Eventually, they get to a point where, okay, Loki amasses a century or centuries of knowledge in physics, chemistry, and all these different fields. Yeah. And then he's able to sort of come up with a way to ensure that Victor Timely successfully, maneuvers his way across the bridge into the temporal loom, and he connects the device into it, and that's it. The sort of rings are expanded and things are stable. But then what happens after that?
It still doesn't work.
Exactly, it still doesn't work. Yeah. And we as viewers, I felt hopeless at that point. I thought, okay, so what's going to happen now? Is the inevitable destruction of everything just awaiting us? And
just on that point, I do wanna give props to the writing team for not telegraphing the story. Because it seems like he's trying, and eventually they'll get to a point where they fix the situation, and then it will be a happy ending. Yeah. But then it turns out no, the solution isn't really the solution at all. Which was a nice touch, I thought.
I honestly, I totally agree. Yeah. So we're shown that if chaos is destined, then chaos is unavoidable, essentially. But then, we see something truly amazing. Loki himself, after having a conversation with He Who Remains, because he goes back in time again, they have a long exchange. Loki essentially tries to prevent Sylvie from killing Kang on numerous occasions, again, it doesn't really pan out well for him. But Kang stops Sylvie, sends her away. But then Loki actually ends up. I think this is something that you might have, raised an eyebrow at. But he essentially develops the ability to freeze time as well.
Yeah.
So on top of controlling the art of time slipping, he's actually able to flat out freeze time himself, which is wow. It's really cool.
Yeah, because we don't really know how many times that scenario has played out. It could be like thousands of times, and maybe he's actually trained to control time in that situation, that scenario.
So
it's like the Dormammu thing.
Yeah.
Because we don't really know.
Loop.
Yeah, we don't really know how many times Doctor Strange got killed by Dormammu before he didn't get killed.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah.
No, totally with you on that one. So, look, I mean, he who remains, he says, look, nothing is going to happen in the way that you want it to happen, Loki. You're not going to win here.
So the whole situation was that I think Kang basically, or he remains, whatever, he says that you're going about it the wrong way around. It's not gonna. You're trying to fix a temporal loom. That's not what it's there for. It's essentially a failsafe to keep the sacred timeline alive. It's not like you can make it wider to allow for more things to go through it. No, it will keep deleting all the other timelines.
That's it.
To keep the sacred timeline alive. So Loki even says, "Oh, that was just like a waste of time. He wasted centuries trying to fix the loom." But turns out that you don't fix the loom. The loom isn't to be fixed. If you fix the loom, the only way you can fix it is by keeping the sacred timeline, just the one timeline.
Yeah.
So that was, I thought that was like a good touch too, because then that subverts the expectations, because you're thinking, oh, maybe you'll find a solution from Kang. The solution isn't really a solution at all.
Yeah.
Which I thought was a nice touch.
So Loki comes up with his own way of dealing with the issue, and he goes back to the point at which, he sees the Big Bang happening, or I think it's moments before. He goes out onto the bridge. No suit to protect himself. I mean, apart from that banging suit he actually had on himself, which is amazing. Loki's dress sense, guys, is just first class, I have to say. First class. Just thought I'd throw that in there. And then what happens after that? Oh my God. Loki walks out, okay, unprotected, by himself, and he begins to transform into classical Loki. So this is his Super Saiyan moment, okay? So he grows his horns. Yeah, the horns that we know and love, the horns that we've been wanting to see since the character was first introduced. He grows those horns, his clothes change, and he goes full Norse god, frost giant, whatever you want to call it. He goes crazy, okay? And what we see him do is single-handedly save the multiverse. He's literally grabbing timeline after timeline.
He destroys the loom first.
No, that's right. He destroys the loom first.
Yeah.
And whatever remains after that, he's grabbing those timelines. And the timelines are literally
like
ropes.
Yeah.
So he's grabbing those ropes, trying to, reinvigorate them. And it's not really working at first, but then he walks towards this hole, this rip in time-space, and he ends up at, it was the remains of He Who Remains Citadel, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was just like the rubbles around that citadel.
Yeah, and what a beautiful scene.
Yeah.
Beautiful visuals. He walks straight out, beautiful colours everywhere. He grabs all the branches together and he stabilizes. Literally, Loki himself stabilizes the entire multiverse. But he can't lose focus at this point. So this is all he's ever going to do. Because, I think it's safe to say that if he chooses to, even waver for a moment, it's just...
Some timelines could die.
Yeah.
Potentially if he wavers, yeah.
Yeah, so Loki is single-handedly maintaining everything.
At that point, he realizes that he needs to go, he needs to full send.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And did you remember the scene where they sort of panned out and they showed a tree?
Yeah, Yggdrasil.
Yeah. And I thought that was a really, really cool little nod.
It was a nice way to tie back into the Norse roots. Because TVA has been, it's like corporate bureaucracy stuff.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really feel like Loki or Thor or anything like that, but just to see Yggdrasil at the end.
Yeah.
Literally the Tree of Life.
Yeah.
It was like a very Loki way of tying the multiverse together. And the TVA, the epilogue shows the TVA monitoring timelines. They show the tree. Instead of that just being like one line when it was just a sacred timeline, it's like literally a tree, and each of them are like individual lines. Mm-hmm. So like the multiverse is sort of like, I guess, a line next to each other, which is pretty cool.
How powerful do you think this version of Loki is?
It's powerful. It's powerful to handle like all the timelines himself. It's pretty powerful.
I mean, are we talking? I don't know. Are we talking Scarlet Witch level, Doctor Strange level? Are we talking?
Probably no.
Because I don't know, because I think if we have like a truly classical version of Loki, he gives any of those characters a run for their money. Now look, I'm not saying he's more powerful than Scarlet
It'll be a
Witch.
long fight.
Yeah, absolutely. But, I think right now he gives Thor a run for his money as well.
I just think that whole situation, that was really a cool scene, but I think his role was quite passive. Like just after he got on the throne, it was a Citadel of Time sort of taking sort of like autopilot, and he basically sacrificed himself where he was holding all the timelines together.
Yeah,
but it was his powers along with the powers of time that was remaining in the Citadel that was sort of assisting him in trying. At least that was my reading. I don't really know if that's accurate or anything like that. You do see like the throne sort of activating when the gold shows up.
Yeah.
So you sort of think that maybe the Citadel itself lends him some power too.
Yeah. No, look, very, very interesting take on that. There were some things that I felt, could have been done a little better. I felt like Renslayer could have been featured a little more, because look, we literally just see one scene of her in this episode, being confronted by Eliath at the end, and that's it.
We could see more of her, probably not in another Loki season, probably like in another movie. But maybe that's ominous. Her sort of seeing Eliath. Maybe it leads to her potentially taming Eliath, and her showing up in another movie. Or she's just dead, and that could also be true. But she's just dead.
I wanted to see another scene of where the TVA was. I mean, as in like what their plans are sort of going forward. I know we get to see some of the characters we know.
They sort of hint at that.
No, we did.
But I think their primary purpose now is to monitor Kang variants. They've already, the throwaway line in that was hinting at Quantumania, where they came across a Kang variant in a 616 adjacent timeline, but that was dealt with, which is probably like the Ant-Man stuff that happened. But I think their primary role, which is kind of ironic, because He Who Remains created the TVA, and now the TVA is essentially hunting his variants. I think their primary their primary purpose now is to hunt down like Kang variants and like take the fight to him.
Mm-hmm. No, I totally agree with that. And you know, I feel as though moving forward, this show is gonna have such a huge impact on everything else happening.
I think going forward, this should be the standard. Not that, I mean, Loki, the second season at least, it's obviously not perfect, but it is of a really, really high quality. I think that's undeniable.
If you were to give it a score out of 10, what would you give it?
I'll probably give it 8. If something like Infinity War is a 10, and like something like Endgame or Thor Ragnarok or Winter Soldier is like a 9, this is probably just a tad level below that.
I agree. I mean, honestly, I'd give it an 8.5.
Yeah.
I think it was a very, very strong season. I'm barely coming up with things to fault. I do agree with some of your criticisms on the show.
The criticisms are very minor.
No, granted.
I mean, I had problems with some of the writing, but the fact that they were able to tie up the story together by the end and stick the landing, which is something that at least the Disney Plus shows don't do. Even WandaVision struggled with the landing. Like, it was like all the episodes were really good, and then episode 10 just ended up being like some weird CGI fest. I think that's happened with every MCU show on Disney Plus show so far. It's not that Loki didn't do CGI either, but it was so well done that you know, there's nothing to complain about the finale or anything like that.
No, totally with you there. Predictions moving forward, for me, I feel as though the version of Loki we see at the end, where, should we just call him classical Loki? I'm just going to call him classical Loki.
No, Lokis.
But you know, the stabilizer of the multiverse.
Yeah.
I think he's going to find a way to maintain the stability of the multiverse, without necessarily needing to be there 24/7. Because I think if he has all this knowledge, if he has all this power, I think he's going to find a way to eventually do it without having to exert so much, you know, power and attention and all of that stuff. Just because I feel like he's going to eventually grow. Now look, naturally, when you have a duty, and in that duty's job description, to stabilize the multiverse, that's a freaking hefty responsibility. That's a very hefty responsibility. So, you know, he's gonna be doing whatever he's doing for a while, and
till the end of time.
Literally. But I do think he's gonna at some point find. I think he may find it difficult as well, and then that might be something that causes the Kang variants across all timelines to ultimately break through and just wreak havoc. I mean, that could literally be what leads into the Kang Dynasty movie. And then Loki could feel such remorse and guilt that therefore he has to be forced to assemble Avengers across the multiverse to help rectify what he's done. Wow.
I don't think that's gonna happen.
I don't think so either, but I think it'd be freaking cool to see something like that.
Yeah, I think my assumption is that we've probably seen the last of Loki. This is essentially like a goodbye to that character. I think the sacrifice that he makes is it feels final.
Yeah.
And this is probably gonna be his legacy. I think we could potentially. I kind of brought it up during our walk here. We could potentially see him, if anything, during either Kang Dynasty or Secret Wars, where maybe if there are people who are seeking help with traveling the multiverse, and he's sort of the root of that, no pun intended.
Oh, he's a tree.
Yeah, maybe we could see him in that, but I think it would be it would do that character great justice if you don't go back to Loki at all. I think the sacrifice that we've seen, which is kind of a shame that Thor doesn't really get to see this sacrifice that he's made.
Yeah, we touched on
Literally
this.
holding up the stability of the multiverse, which is huge.
Hey, it would have been cool to have maybe like an alternate version of Odin, see what his, son is capable of.
We did sort of bring this up during the mid-season review where we said maybe we'll see Odin or Loki or Thor show up in this season towards the end, maybe. Just as I'm glad that they didn't do that, because a lot of Marvel shows have been relying on this nostalgia factor.
And it would have felt really out of place and clunky.
Yeah, it would have. It was a good thing that they strictly focused on the characters that were in this show, and they didn't rely on some other guy showing up. They didn't rely on like Daredevil to show up to up the profile of this show. Again, like the writing of this show is so good that even when they do take like wrong steps, you don't really think too much about it. And I think going forward that needs to be the standard for the Marvel shows, for the movies. Hell, I mean the directors who directed all the episodes, to my knowledge, are directing the last 4 episodes of Daredevil. I won't be shocked if going forward they're more involved with MCU, because they've produced the best MCU content since Endgame.
Yeah, I think we both agree on that. That the Loki show has been.
There's a Loki movie.
I wish. But this Loki show has been single-handedly maintaining the integrity of the MCU.
It invigorated the MCU the way Loki invigorated
the multiverse. Yeah, literally.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think obviously Marvel's is out too. That probably won't have any sort of bearing on the movie or anything like that, I'm sure. But I wouldn't be surprised if, because of Loki, people do tune in to go watch the Marvels, because I reckon that there is some level of interest that's back with the MCU. I think.
I wanted to ask you something, and I wanted to know what our viewers think as well. Do you think going into the multiversal arena or taking the multiversal route makes everything that we've seen since that first Iron Man movie cheaper? And the reason I ask that is because there's literally an infinite version of Iron Men out there. There's an infinite version of Incredible Hulks. There's an infinite version of Thor. There's an infinite Thors, I should say. There's an infinite version of all these different characters that we know and love. And we've seen some of these variants. We've seen Doctor Strange in different shapes and forms. We've seen Spider-Man in different shapes and forms, where I'm pretty sure we're going to see variants of other characters as well. Now, because of that, because there's infinite versions of all these different characters, do you think the stories of the 616 versions of these characters, just because there are versions, have become less significant?
I don't think so. I think from an audience point of view, obviously, the setup that ended up with Endgame, obviously, that would hold so much weight. And I think like Mobius's character mentioned something in that I guess conversation with B-15, where he says, "Oh, I have to go down there and see what we've been protecting," in reference to the sacred timeline. So the 616 universe has to mean something in the grand scheme of things. I think even within like any universe, the 616 probably has a lot more meaning. Maybe beings like the Celestials and potentially like Galactus and stuff are probably aware of. They probably don't know it as 616, but they're probably aware of this universe and the stuff that has happened.
Here's the thing: are there multiple versions of the Celestials? Because we know that. Look, we've seen Arishem, right? So we saw him in the Eternals movie. Now, the thing is, I would struggle. I mean, I struggle with the concept of there being multiple Arishams out there because that kind of power is unfathomable. And if you have, just multiple or an infinite amount of Celestials, how on earth does everything still function in the way that it does? Or do they just choose not to, by treaty, like not to interfere in each other's universes? I mean, I don't know.
They haven't really explored that area in Eternals or just beyond that movie at all about the Celestials. But didn't they say that they work beyond space and time?
I think they alluded to that, but then again, look, we have beings like Scarlet Witch. You know, she's a Nexus being. Now, does that mean that Multiverse of Madness showed us that there are multiple versions of the Scarlet Witch character as well?
Yeah.
I was under the impression that for a being as powerful as her, a being that can literally warp reality, there would be one version of that particular character across the multiverse. I mean, look, don't you remember where, I think it was Agatha Harkness that was talking to her, saying that, oh, you're destined to, the Scarlet Witch is destined to wreak havoc across either the universe or the multiverse. Something along those lines.
I think her knowledge is probably limited to that universe.
Yeah.
Because she comes from like a cult. And her knowledge of the Scarlet Witch basically stems from the knowledge of that cult, and I think that cult's knowledge is limited to that universe. I don't think she knows too much about the multiverse or anything like that. But ultimately, Scarlet Witch is a mutant, and seeing different versions of mutant is normal compared to something like obviously a Celestial's probably on like a whole another level in terms of power.
You see, that's what we're led to believe.
Yeah.
But look, if you have someone like a Scarlet Witch who can literally shape reality to her will, I mean, you know, you've come across her no more mutants.
Yeah.
And what did that do? That literally decimated 50% of the mutant population. Crazy, right? Somebody capable of that level of power. You know, just the idea of that being existing infinitely across every reality, you know, it's something I tend to struggle with, because imagine if every version of that character, look, they might not be the same power level, but they have the potential to be at the same power. Now, imagine if every variant of that same character wished for all the people in their version of Earth to be destroyed. There's nothing to stop that from happening. Do you know what I'm saying? And it's crazy, and that could literally mean Earth in every reality out there is completely decimated. So
I don't really know if someone like Scarlet Witch, for example, I don't know if they can affect every Earth, right?
I see what you're saying, but I think Multiverse of Madness led us to believe that was potentially the route that character was going in, so that's why they worked so hard to try and, you know, put a stop to whatever she was planning.
Because in Multiverse of Madness, the extent of her powers was to project herself to what A38 or whatever the universe's name was, to project herself to that universe's Scarlet Witch, right? Or to that universe's Wanda, and she was running around chasing Doctor Strange and stuff. So
what was that called? Dream walking or
something like that. I don't even remember that all that well. I'm assuming that was a power granted by the Darkhold or something. But she was able to do that. But I reckon that's a pretty minor power to control another being on a completely different universe. It sounds crazy, but that's one being on another universe. I think the extent of her power wouldn't be too far beyond that. I think to affect every Earth is challenging, even for Scarlet Witch.
No, I'm with you there.
She can definitely cause havoc in her own Earth. She can split the Earth in half, probably. I won't be shocked. But that's still her Earth.
No, look, you're right there. You're right there.
Well, I don't know how we.
I don't know how. Yeah, neither do I.
But I think what we're alluding to is to the fact that the multiverse is a very real thing now, and the possibilities are endless. But you also come across this problem where Marvel has had major problems post Endgame when it comes to creating content, because they've been focusing a lot more on quantity than quality.
Mm-hmm.
So infinite possibility doesn't really mean you should just go out and make anything.
Yeah.
I think it still needs to fit into a track.
Absolutely.
The train needs to go in the same direction.
Yeah.
And like even a rock on the rail could like derail the whole train. So it remains to be seen what the Marvels do. Maybe it brings the interest level back down because the reception. We don't need to get into the Marvels today.
Yeah.
That's something we'll probably touch on next week. How long have we been going for? Not that long, actually. But yeah, I think the possibilities are endless. The TVA are definitely coming back. I think Owen Wilson, who was it, B-15? I think they signed up for Deadpool 3. So we know kind of that the TVA are going to show up in Deadpool 3. We don't really know at what capacity.
Here's the thing though, which version of the TVA is this now?
No,
because
I think the TVA, there's just the one TVA across every timeline.
So that TVA, okay, because that was going to be my next question. So this TVA is responsible for time reaches across every universe, every timeline.
Yeah.
So it governs everything. Because, I mean, like you mentioned, there was that.
They probably don't control time reaches anymore.
But there was the thing you mentioned about in the conversation B-15 had with, Mobius, the 616 variant of Kang, and that was pretty interesting because in the case that they're still keeping track, of different things happening.
It was a 616 adjacent Kang, by the way.
Yeah.
I think they were talking about the Kang in
Quantum Realm. Yeah.
The 616 Kang is He Who Remains, who's dead now.
See, this is trippy because we don't even know.
I mean, he did say he was protecting the sacred timeline. The sacred timeline is 616. He was protecting his own timeline.
But the sacred timeline is everything.
No. The sacred timeline is just that the MCU.
No, I know what you mean. But what I'm saying is the sacred timeline. Are you saying the sacred timeline has nothing to do with anything that's not 616?
Yeah.
Okay.
He's just protecting. So it's kind of meta in a way. Anything that happens that hasn't happened in the MCU gets pruned. So Loki escaping New York, that wasn't supposed to happen. So that timeline, the branch timeline, that got pruned. Sylvie wasn't really a 616 Loki, so that timeline got pruned. So essentially, 616 is the sacred timeline is basically 616 timeline, and they were trying to keep that going. But obviously now there's multiple timelines living alongside each other. There's no sacred timeline anymore. Essentially, sacred timeline essentially becomes 616, and there's stuff alongside it now. It's
really tricky.
That's my understanding of it.
Yeah, because
again, I could be wrong.
Honestly, the way I sort of looked at it was, I mean, look, He Who Remains, he knew everything that was going to happen to like every single freaking character. Well, every single person in the MCU across all reality. Now that's the way that I sort of saw it, and I saw all these different timelines being governed by or through the sacred timeline, and the fact that all these extra branches, emerged, which is causing everything to run into absolute anarchy. It's just one thing this show.
That's why you shouldn't think too much about it.
The one thing this show didn't do was really sort of delve into what is what, and it didn't spend too long in that. And in some ways, it's good, but in other ways, it sort of leaves
Yeah,
lots of questions, you know, and it makes you curious because everyone has their theories. Thing is, whose theory is actually the right theory? You know.
You haven't watched Lost, have you?
No.
I mean, for the most part, it's a good show. Throughout the show, they keep introducing new mysteries, smoke monster, bunkers, colonies, whatever. And like throughout every season, you sort of, because the whole point of it was like the original Game of Thrones in a way, where you had people every week speculating, oh, what does this mean?
Yeah.
What is the meaning of this? What could this lead to? Right? But you probably know more about Lost for having like a bad finale than anything else. Mostly because there were a lot of questions that they brought up that they didn't answer. And it's nice and fun to create mysteries for the audience so that you keep the conversation going within the fan base and stuff.
Yeah.
But ultimately you have to answer those questions. If they're major, then you should at least attempt to answer those questions. And there are some questions that still remain unanswered coming out of Loki season 2, and the weird thing is there's a very, very good chance, it's almost certain, that there won't be a season 3. The writers have already said, I think there was like an interview last week actually. I didn't read it because I was scared that it might spoil stuff. But I read it after I watched the finale. And he said that they envisioned Loki as like a 2-season story. They basically told that story. There was a start and a finish. They had never plans for a season 3. They didn't really. I mean, season 2 didn't even really end on a cliffhanger that leads to season 3, the same way season 1 did. And they're not going to be involved if there is a season 3. I mean, we know how Marvel operates, but they're not going to be involved. So there's a very good chance that there's not going to be a continuation of this storyline, but you'll probably still see people like the TVA and Mobius probably showing up in Deadpool 3, for example. Or you'll probably have Renslayer showing up in a future project. But yeah, the answers remain. Sorry, the questions remain. So try not to think too much about it.
Yeah, because you end up giving yourself a headache.
I think we've pretty much covered the entirety of the second season. What do you think? I just wanted to end on the final. I guess the final point of where do you think the story goes now, in regards to like the TVA, potentially Loki, if you think that he might tie into one of the future projects that have been announced. What do you think?
So, I mean, I think Loki himself is just going to be doing exactly what he's been doing. I think at some point he will. It could go two ways. I think he will struggle with maintaining the stability of the multiverse and just collapse, which means everything just falls into chaos again, and all the evil variants of Kang just wreak absolute havoc, which is your segue into Kang Dynasty, and therefore Loki has a role, an actual final role in assembling Avengers across the multiverse, joining them to take down all these different variants of Kang. But look, I'm thinking way far ahead. Or it could be the case that Loki just sails off into the sunset. He finds a way. He develops some sort of further power to maintain the stability of the multiverse without too much detriment to to himself. And by doing that, he can just literally sail off into the sunset and retire. Maybe even just give himself like a maybe like a new life, where he's alone, away from everybody else, and just in the solitude where he can't hurt nobody, but where he's redeemed himself. I don't know. They could give him like a really cute little poetic ending. They could reunite him with Thor and Odin, but I feel like that would just cheapen his story. So I actually wouldn't like to see that. I mean, don't get me wrong. Maybe like a cameo where they reunite for like a moment or two. That'd be really nice to see. But yeah, I don't want to make it look as though. I don't want them to make it look as though. Okay, so here's the journey Loki's been on, and now he's back with his brother, he's back with his dad, and that's it. Or it's, hunky dory. No, he's matured. He's become a completely different character, and I'd like to see him sort of sail off into the sunset now. But yeah, I mean that's basically where I am with the character. In terms of your TVA, I'd say, look, like you mentioned, we're going to probably see them in the next Deadpool movie. I'd like to maybe see them pop up in the Avengers movie as well, which I think they will in like a Kang Dynasty. I think that would probably be highly likely, actually.
Potentially, if they're dealing with the multiverse, I think the TVA will probably be involved.
Yeah, no, exactly. I've got to say, I'm not too fussed about whether or not we see Renslayer again or Mo.
Yeah, I think we saw like a full stop to
Yeah.
that story. Honestly.
Yeah. So I'm not really too fussed about that character. But yeah, I mean that's ultimately where I am with the show. I'm just really impressed by the whole show. I mean, honestly, it's been such a fascinating watch, such a thought-provoking watch, and I'm just glad that we got to witness it.
And I will say it has kept the fan base really engaged. I've seen a lot more activity in the Marvel subreddits, in forums, on Twitter, more so than I've seen with anything after WandaVision. I think with WandaVision we saw some speculation, but like Falcon the Winter Soldier, Miss Marvel, Hawkeye, none of those were really, it didn't really promote or motivate conversation about the stories. So that's good. I think a level of positivity is back in terms with content. I know we're not touching on news, but there were some really bad news with the MCU of delays and stuff, and poor negative reviews for the Marvels, negative reviews for the first screening of the new Captain America movie, for example. So we're not going to touch on that. I think
We can save that for our next video.
we probably don't even need to like touch on that at all, because these are. I mean, we're probably. I mean, we're
going to come up with our. We're definitely going to touch on the Marvels.
Yeah.
I know I told you guys I probably wasn't going to see that movie, but
I mean, we're
going to have to.
I mean, what sort of channel will we be if we don't even review the latest Marvel movie?
No, absolutely.
So,
Because a man has his preferences. I'm an Avengers guy. I'm a
I
Thor
think
guy.
we need to go into that movie not expecting anything.
Yeah.
And that's probably what we'll get.
I mean that's great way to go into it. We're setting ourselves up for just a fun watch, I suppose. And nothing more than that.
What's the worst that can happen?
Yeah.
If you go in with an expectation of 1 out of 10, if it's a 2 out of 10, that's doubling your expectation. Anyway, there are low expectations going into it. There are more. I think the expectations are lower after having seen the reviews. But we'll cover all of that, I think, next week. We're planning on watching it sometime in the next week, and then we'll cover it in the next episode. And I think at some point, I mean, we'll still touch on news if there is any news in the coming weeks. But at some point, we need to do sort of like a revisit of the post-Endgame MCU and dedicate an episode to it, because I think there's a lot to talk about with that.
Absolutely.
But I think we should leave it at that for today's episode. I don't even know if it's longer or shorter than the previous episodes, but I hope that you've enjoyed our discussion. We definitely enjoyed Loki. I think that's been the consensus throughout the fan base, and we just going forward, we just hope more shows are like that, and we're able to cover shows with this level of positivity in future episodes.
Yeah.
So thank you for bearing with us for like a whole hour while we talk about this, and yeah, please do come back next week while we're maybe the conversation will be completely different next week. And it will just be mostly negative stuff. But yeah, we hope you tune in next week. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, guys. Really, really appreciate it. Remember, Nerdfeedcast. Get all your friends, get all your family to follow, like, subscribe, leave a comment. Anything you want us to touch on, make sure you let us know, and we will for sure touch on it. And
I know we have been getting comments of covering this and that, but we can't really touch on that while we're talking about Loki.
Yeah. No, exactly.
So there's gonna be like the next Marvel thing. I mean, Marvel's is already out, but the next Marvel thing is Echo, which is January 10th. So there's a big gap. What if season 2 might come out in between then?
Oh, we'll definitely cover that if it does.
Yeah, if it does, we'll definitely cover that. But there's going to be a gap.
Yeah.
Also, we're not just covering Marvel. I think we need to start covering other stuff. We haven't really. We touched on Star Wars like first day, and then we haven't really touched on that at all.
I mean, have you seen the first episode of Invincible? Season 2?
No. I haven't even seen the first season.
Oh man, you have to.
I'm just gonna wait until. I'll wait like 10 years when the show is over.
Watch the first season, honestly. You could get through it in
one night. It's good. I mean, it's got a good cast too. It's got John Cho and J.K. Simmons and stuff, right?
Good is an understatement. Imagine, okay, so what's the goriest comic movie you've seen, or the fight movie, or whatever?
Goriest or fight movie?
Fighting movie or comic movie, whatever.
That's
his
hard.
name.
Probably Kill Bill or something like that.
Okay, imagine a comic book adaptation of Kill Bill.
Why would I imagine that?
Because
there's a movie called Kill Bill.
But they're just like going at it, and they don't hold back, and it's so good, man. You have to watch it.
All right, tune in next week when it's called Invisible Cast. What? Invincible Cast.
Invincible. We know it's not Marvel, guys, but look, ultimately we're fans of all things comic book. All things comic book, yeah. Whether it's Marvel, Star Wars, DC. I'm joking. I'm joking. We love DC.
Hey, James Gunn is in charge now, so maybe we'll get something
DC.
good out of him.
No, we love DC. And look, whatever it is, we'll cover it. Just make sure you tune in, guys.
Yeah, thank you.
Take care.